Spider-Man dies in such a heroic way that you'll probably be crying by the end of this video. Peter Benjamin Parker is and has always been one of the most beloved characters in the Marvel pantheon of heroes. Spidey is without a doubt one of the finest and most successful young superheroes with his sarcastic quips and plucky can-do attitude, which makes the friendly neighborhood wall crawler not only popular amongst comic book fans, but among his many prodigious peers as well. So, in the year 2000, when Marvel debuted their Ultimate Universe, the prospect of seeing another young teenage Peter Parker rise to prominence as a spectacular Spider-Man was thrilling to all. A fresh, new universe to be filled with familiar faces and novel storylines. An easily digestible introduction to the idea of parallel universes existing in step with one another. But while the original Peter Parker continued to thwip around New York City well into his adulthood, the juvenile Ultimate Universe's Peter Parker was swinging not towards triumph, but tragedy. So get the tissues ready because this is the story of how Spider-Man finally met his heartbreaking end. 1. Peter's final days. Just days before his untimely end, Peter was surprised at home by his closest friends and family to celebrate his 16th birthday party. Still in high school and living with Aunt May, both Peter's friends from school and his newfound superheroing attend to show Peter just how much they care for and appreciated him. It was a fun-filled and joyous night for all, particularly Peter, who finally got up the courage to ask Mary Jane to take him back. "I love you," he told her once they were finally alone, blurting the words out suddenly, almost as if by accident. "All this crazy we've been through this year, I see you. None of it matters," Peter told MJ softly. She responded with trademark MJ bluntness. "You got me back." The two sealed the rekindling of their relationship with a kiss, and for once, things seemed to be turning up for the mild-mannered Peter Parker. Little did they know this would be one of the last kisses the couple would ever share. Meanwhile, in a high-security S.H.I.E.L.D. prison at the Triskelion, the mutated part-time goblin Norman Osborn remains under the lock and key of the U.S. government. And though his body is suspended in his cell, his brain thinks freely of all the ways he hopes to one day kill his imprisoner, Spider-Man. Evidently, S.H.I.E.L.D. heavily underestimated Osborn. As soon after he awakens, he quickly regains his goblin powers and proceeds to bust out of the prison as though it were made of paper. During his escape, the goblin spares no expense as he rips and bursts through the walls built to contain him. But it seems freedom isn't the only thing on Gobby's mind. With frightening efficiency, he proceeds to break out the other antagonists of the wall crawler being held by S.H.I.E.L.D. By Osborn's hand, supervillains Electro, Kraven, Sandman, Doc Ock, and the Vulture are all free of their respective cells within minutes. With his newfound Sinister Six assembled, Norman and his new super squad commandeer a helicopter taking to the skies. Though there are noticeable differences between these villains and their prime Marvel Universe counterparts, in general, their powers work fairly similarly, with the notable exception of the Goblin himself. The one thing all these criminals do share with their more famous counterparts is a deep, burning hatred for Peter Benjamin Parker for foiling their plans and landing them in prison. Once grounded and confident that they've managed to give their pursuers the slip, the six supervillains regroup and start to discuss their plans. On the news, the Vulture notices some sort of superhuman civil war has broken out on one of the bridges of New York, giving their prison break a much-needed smokescreen. "It's God's work," the fanatical Norman Osborn tells his compatriots. "He wants us to smite our enemies so we don't repeat our mistakes. He wants us to kill Peter Parker." Osborn manages to convince his recently formed group of six, all save one. "I know that look," Dr. Octopus tells Norman. "You have revenge in your eyes. I'm just not there. That's not where my head is at. I want to get back to my work." This refusal to go along with his plan doesn't sit well with Norman, who promptly transforms into his goblin form and smacks Octavius off the building. A fight of epic proportions ensues as the goblin faces the octopus. And though Ock puts up a brave defense, eventually Osborn finds his opening, pummeling his giant flaming fists again and again into Doc Ock's feeble frame, outright killing his rival and leaving no question as to what the Sinister Six's next moves would be. As news breaks of the villain's escape, MJ calls Peter in a panic, but even as she does, Peter witnesses a massive explosion on the George Washington Bridge. Torn between which of these two disasters to respond to first, Peter chooses his family. He rushes home and informs Aunt May and Gwen Stacy to flee from their home as fast as possible. His family out of immediate danger, Spidey heads back into the fray and tries to track down the murderous missing malcontents intent on killing him. However, as he swings through the chaos of the Civil War raging around him, he spots the Punisher training his crosshairs at the back of Captain America. "No," Peter whispers as he dashes across the burning bridge. And just as the Punisher squeezes his trigger finger and the bullet explodes from his barrel, Spider-Man tackles Cap to the ground. The bullet intended for the Star-Spangled Sentinel whizzes past Steve Rogers' skull and carves itself directly into Peter's back, narrowly missing his spine and bursting out the other side in a splatter of blood. Looking back, there's no question that Peter's choice to intervene in this key climactic moment of the Civil War by saving Cap's life would later cost him his own. In the sprawling, emotional, and brutal fight in which Spidey would soon find himself, a bullet wound of such magnitude certainly would have meant the difference between life and death. But the Punisher's bullet would be just the first of many injuries our young, wall-crawling hero would sustain on this, his final night on Earth. Brace yourselves, because the next chapter of our tale may not be so easy to watch. But it's much easier to watch Plot Armor Comics when you're subscribed to the channel with notifications on. 2. Spider-Man's final battle. As Peter slowly but surely bled out on the bridge, the group of villains intent on murdering the young man finally reached the Parker residence. There they found not their intended target, but two other teenage superheroes Peter had asked to keep watch over his house for the night. When the ne'er-do-wells arrived, they were met with the combined force of Iceman and the Human Torch, both of whom burst into action at the sight of the terrible troop. Now, Spidey has shared varying levels of closeness with these two heroes at different times in his life, and to be sure, Peter, Johnny, and Bobby have shared some close calls together within the Prime Marvel Universe. But in the Ultimate Universe, the three truly grew up alongside one another, creating bonds in their youth that in the Prime Universe wouldn't truly form until they were much older. For this reason, the Ultimate Universe may have seen the closest these three teenagers have ever bonded, a friendship that culminated in the harrowing attack on the Parker's house that one fateful night. Johnny Storm, in trademark fashion, wasted no time in quickly taking the fight to the meanest mug he could see, the Green Goblin himself. Though Johnny fared impressively against Osborn, one mean sand wave from Sandman extinguished the Torch's flames and rendered him incapacitated. This left Iceman, who bravely jumped into the fight until Electro managed to catch him mid-slide with a sizzling shock blast. It was then, after both Johnny and Bobby had been soundly defeated, that Pete arrived. Maskless and still gripping his blood-soaked ribs, Spider-Man instinctively whipped the Vulture's face and hurled him far through the night sky, making quick work of at least one of the 5 villains that had come to dispatch him. Weakly through bated breath, Peter turned back to his enemies and managed... Who's... next? While Goblin was still laying out from his battle against the Torch, Peter somehow found the strength to stand against 3 of his fiercest rogues all on his own. While the whole neighborhood watched, Spider-Man stared down Sandman, Electro, and Kraven the Hunter. "Get him!" Sandman cried as the 3 barreled down on Pete. Reflexively, with the proportional speed of a spider, Pete knocked out a fire hydrant and directed the outpour toward the 3 oncoming attackers. Electro's powers kicked up a current through the deluge that electrocuted his allies and sent all 3 spasming to the ground. But Spidey's moment of victory wouldn't last long. Before he had a moment to himself, Sandman was back nearly suffocating Pete in a landslide of sand and dirt. And as soon as Spidey removed himself from that battle, the Vulture came screaming back into the fight, carpet-bombing Peter and forcing him to take the brunt of the hits so as to save the civilian onlookers. After this, Spidey took a number of subsequent hits that sent him reeling down the street, losing copious amounts of blood from his bullet wound with each successive smack. As Peter lay near death on the ground, Electro stepped up to take the final blow himself. "I want to see his face when it happens," he said. "I want to see it." Downed, bloodied, and barely conscious, Peter replied, "Electro, I always meant to tell you. You were my greatest adversary, and it was an honor to battle you." "Oh wait, that wasn't you. I barely even gave you a second thought." But even as Electro drew back to send a final charring bolt at the boy, a bullet ripped through the electrified criminal's chest, with 2 more following up in quick succession. The overcharged explosion that followed Electro's meltdown took out all 3 of the surrounding villains, seemingly ending the fight. When the dust settled and Peter looked up to see who had saved his life, Aunt May stood before him holding a smoking gun. The 2 embraced, Peter barely holding on to consciousness after losing so much blood and being pummeled within an inch of his life. But just as the quiet settled and both aunt and nephew thought the danger had come to a close, the Green Goblin rose to stand over them, hate radiating from his blood-red eyes. Grabbing both May and Gwen and leaping away from the Goblin's blow, Peter barely managed to get everyone out from under Osborn's fist in time. After screaming at his aunt and his ex-girlfriend to run far away, Spidey leapt back into the fray and clocked the Goblin square on the jaw. Gobby careened to the ground as Pete, desperate for any sort of help at this point, woke up Johnny Storm. The Human Torch once more flew into battle against the Goblin, but something was different this time. The Goblin seemed ready for Johnny's second full frontal assault, and the Torch's hits didn't seem to have the same effect they did during their first encounter. Every iota of flame Johnny poured into Osborn somehow only seemed to make the Goblin stronger, angrier. Norman absorbed the energy being funneled toward him until the torch simply ran out of gas. After Johnny fell, the goblin once more turned to stand over Peter, overcharged with energy and crackling with his newfound power. Tactfully, Peter deployed evasive maneuvers, hiding amongst the wreckage and jumping out at Norman, driving a mailbox hard into the back of Gobby's head. Even though he'd gotten the drop on the demon, Peter's offensive wasn't nearly enough to down the terrible titan. As Spidey kneeled in the dirt, the Green Goblin stood once more and continued marching towards his prey, intent on taking Peter's life. But just when all looked hopeless, Mary Jane seemingly saved the day as she drove a truck directly into Norman as he stood over Peter. The vehicle hit with a devastating impact and sent Osborn reeling. After Peter helped MJ from the total truck, the two embraced and shared what would be their final kiss. Pete then walked up to Osborn, who was already recuperating from the crash. Lifting the truck above his head, Peter finally yelled, "Shut up!" as he brought the entire van down twice on top of Osborn's scaly head. Finally, it seemed the villains had been heartily defeated. But even as Spidey took to look over at Mary Jane, the truck he had used to take down the goblin exploded with massive force. The force of the blast sent Pete head over heels through the air, skidding to a stop nearby. Once his body had come to a stop, it was clear that Peter Parker no longer even had the strength to sit up. As his friends and family surrounded him, tears streaming down their faces, Peter looked up at his Aunt May and whispered weakly, "It's okay. I did it. Don't you see? It's okay, I did it. I couldn't save him. Uncle Ben, I couldn't save him. No matter what I did, but I saved you. I did it. I did." And with those final heartbreaking words, Peter Parker, the Amazing Spider-Man, breathed his last. 3. A new spider rises. The ramifications of a 16-year-old Peter Parker's death within the Ultimate Universe are wide, sprawling, and complex. For one, as Peter had just recently been considered for a spot on the Avengers. He had just begun to break into the Ultimate Universe's superhuman community at large, making connections and forging friendships that would have served him well as he grew into adulthood. But with his premature death, the lives of Iron Man, Captain America, Black Widow, and many others involved in the superhuman Civil War would never be the same. For some, this tragic moment would simply be another reminder of the inherent dangers of bringing children into a life of vigilantism. For in their eyes, this young man represented the best of them. They saw it as their duty to raise the next generation to do better than the last. And considering that the Civil War raging through New York had directly contributed to this brave teenager's death, that failure weighed heavily on the shoulders of those involved. In this way, the death of Spider-Man reverberated out across the Ultimate Intelligence community and made the universe much more cautious, considerate, and far less careless. A change in tone that would be keenly felt when the eventual destruction of the Ultimate Universe came with the Secret Wars event. But that's a story for another time. However, the largest and most impactful consequence of Peter's death has nothing to do with the internal workings of the Ultimate Universe. Indeed, the character that found his footing in the wake of Peter's death would not only change his own universe, but would change the history of Marvel Comics as we know it. We're of course talking about the one and only Miles Morales. Though he's now solidified his spot alongside Peter as a Spider-Man in his own right, it was Peter's absence in the Ultimate Universe that provided the original proving ground for Marvel to debut their newest Spidey. Miles and Peter can clearly operate alongside each other with no friction or contradiction whatsoever, as movies, TV shows, and plenty of comics have since shown us. But when Miles originally took the stage, it was in a world without Peter Parker, a world that had just lost its Spider-Man. In fact, when Miles Morales was first bitten by the spider that gave him his powers, he eventually found himself 3 stalwart allies in 2 of Peter Parker's closest allies, Aunt May, Mary Jane, and Gwen Stacy. These 3 women working together helped lead Miles as he was still just starting out on his journey to become the Spider-Man we all know and love today. There's certainly a touching heartache to this connection between Miles and Peter's found family. For the mark that Peter left on the world was so strong and so powerful that it reached across the chasm of his death to help the next young wallcrawler as he was just starting out on his journey in the form of 2 of those closest to him. In this way, it felt as though Peter's legacy was not just those of heroic actions which he accomplished in his life. Though Miles Morales now exists in the Prime Marvel Universe, working alongside the still-breathing Peter Parker there, it would be a mistake to forget the sacrifice and guidance that the Ultimate Universe's Peter Parker gave in helping Miles become the Spider-Man he is today. Thanks for watching. I've been Alexandra Macedo. Have an awesome day!